Okay, so I bought a cruise ship. Not a ticket, not a cabin, the entire ship. The kind of floating city with swimming pools, restaurants, theaters, thousands of passengers, and a fuel bill large enough to make most business owners physically uncomfortable. From the outside, it looked like the ultimate business. I could sell the same cabins every week. I could carry thousands of customers at once. Every voyage could bring in millions of dollars. And while the passengers were relaxing beside the pool, ordering drinks, and taking photographs of the ocean, the ship would appear to be printing money. My name is Michael Carter. I am an entrepreneur from Miami, and several years ago, I decided that owning a cruise ship could become the biggest opportunity of my career. I had already invested in hotels, restaurants, and tourist businesses, but a cruise ship seemed different. A hotel stays in one place. A cruise ship moves between countries and controls almost everything passengers buy during the journey. I thought I was buying a ship. What I was really buying was a hotel, a shopping center, a theater, a power plant, a transportation company, and a small city, all packed inside one enormous steel vessel. The ship I wanted was not brand new. A newly built modern cruise ship could cost several $100 million, while the largest vessels could cost more than $1 billion. I did not have $1 billion, so I found an older ship being sold by a major cruise company. It had more than 1,000 cabins, restaurants, bars, a theater, a casino, pools, shops, and enough equipment to keep a small town alive at sea. It was terrifying, but the purchase price was only the entrance fee. Before the ship could carry a single paying passenger, I needed financing, inspections, insurance, new safety equipment, updated cabins, port agreements, staff recruitment, food supplies, fuel, and enough cash to survive the first several months. The bank agreed to finance part of the purchase, but the loan created a massive monthly payment. And the bank did not care whether the ship was full, half empty, delayed by a storm, or sitting in port because of a mechanical problem. The payment was due either way. Then came the renovation budget. The cabins looked dated. The carpets, kitchens, entertainment systems, safety equipment, and paint all needed work before passengers would trust the ship. Then came the legal fees. Then the port deposits. Then the cost of preparing the ship for its first voyage. By the time everything was included, my $240 million ship required almost $300 million before the first passenger even stepped on board. And that was the first lesson I learned. Buying a cruise ship is not the same as buying a profitable cruise business. The ship is only the machine. You still have to find thousands of customers, fill the cabins, operate the vessel, and somehow make more money than the machine consumes. And this machine consumed money every hour of every day, even when it was not moving. Every day in port meant fees, maintenance, salaries, inspections, and loan interest. Every empty cabin meant revenue I could never recover. A cruise ship cannot pause its expenses and try again next month. Once a voyage begins, the clock starts. Fuel burns, employees work, kitchens open, engines run, food is served, entertainment begins. Thousands of lights, elevators, air conditioners, pumps, and machines operate almost constantly. And if only half the cabins are occupied, most of those costs barely change. That was the contradiction hiding behind the glamorous photographs. The ship could generate millions of dollars in revenue and still lose money. I had not bought a giant money-making machine. I had bought a giant expense-making machine that could become profitable only if I kept it full, kept it moving, and convinced every passenger to spend far more than the price of their ticket. The real business had not even started yet. The first time I saw the ship fully staffed, I understood why cruise companies obsess over occupancy. There were more than 1,000 crew members on board. Engineers, cooks, cleaners, security officers, entertainers, waiters, technicians, doctors, electricians, and managers were all being paid before a single passenger bought a drink. Most guests never saw the machinery behind the experience. They saw polished floors, fresh towels, live music, and endless food. I saw payroll. Every department had its own schedule, supply list, and emergency plan. The kitchen alone operated like a factory. Thousands of meals had to be prepared every day, and the food had to be loaded before departure because there was no supermarket in the middle of the ocean. Then there was fuel. A cruise ship does not sip fuel. It burns enormous amounts of it simply to move, generate electricity, power air conditioning, heat water, operate kitchens, run elevators, and keep every system alive. When fuel prices rose, my costs increased immediately. I could not call the passengers and ask them to pay more halfway through the voyage. Their tickets had already been sold. That meant every sudden increase came directly out of my margin. The same thing happened with ports. Every destination charged us for docking, passenger handling, waste removal, security, and local services. Some ports were far more expensive than others, and the most popular routes were often the most competitive. A route could look perfect on a map and still be financially weak. If the port fees were high, the fuel distance was long, and passengers did not spend much once they boarded, the voyage could attract attention without creating much profit. Maintenance created another problem. Salt water damages almost everything. Metal corrodes, paint peels, pipes wear down, engines need inspections, air conditioning systems fail, elevators stop, kitchen equipment breaks, cabins need repairs after almost every trip. The ship never truly became finished. The moment one repair ended, another began. And unlike a hotel, I could not simply close one floor for a month and continue operating normally. A mechanical problem could delay the entire vessel, affect thousands of passengers, and create compensation costs, hotel bills, refunds, and damaged trust. One afternoon, an engineer told me that a technical issue had been found in one of the propulsion systems. The repair itself was manageable. The timing was not. We were supposed to leave the next morning with nearly every cabin sold. For several hours, I watched managers calculate the consequences. If we delayed departure, passengers might miss flights and excursions. If we canceled, we would lose ticket revenue, issue refunds, pay suppliers, and still cover salaries, port charges, and loan payments. That was when I learned the second major lesson of the cruise business. High operating costs do not wait for revenue. The crew must still be paid. The ship must still be maintained. The bank must still be paid. The ports must still be paid. Even passengers who never board can cost the company money if a cancellation forces refunds and compensation. By that point, I stopped thinking about revenue as money I owned. Revenue was simply money passing through the ship. Before any of it became profit, it had to survive fuel, payroll, food, maintenance, insurance, port fees, entertainment, cleaning, security, financing, and repairs. The ticket sales looked impressive on a spreadsheet, but the expenses were already waiting for them. A full ship created energy, but it also created pressure. More passengers meant more meals, more cleaning, more water, more waste, and more chances for something expensive to go wrong before we returned to Miami. And there was one more problem. Selling every cabin still might not be enough. I had assumed the ticket was the product. It was not. The ticket was only the beginning of the sale. That realization changed the way I looked at every passenger who walked onto the ship. At first, I saw a guest who had already paid. Then I saw a customer who had only made the first purchase. The ticket got them through the door, but almost everything beyond the basic experience created another opportunity for revenue. The cabin was paid for, the buffet was included, the main show was included, but the steakhouse was not. The premium cocktails were not. The spa, photographs, casino, excursions, faster internet, shops, cabin upgrades, and private dining were all separate. A passenger might pay a relatively low price for the cruise and then spend hundreds more inside my floating city. I controlled the environment. And the environment was designed to make spending feel easy. The room key also worked as a payment card. Passengers did not hand over cash every time they ordered something. They tapped a card and continued enjoying the trip. That separation mattered. A $13 cocktail did not feel like $13 when it disappeared into a bill reviewed several days later. I began tracking another core number: onboard spending per passenger. If two voyages carried the same number of people, but passengers on one route spent more in the bars, shops, casino, spa, and excursions, that voyage could be far more profitable. The cabins were identical, the fuel burn was similar, the crew worked the same shifts, but the revenue per guest was completely different, so we redesigned the experience around that number. We offered drink packages before departure because passengers preferred one large payment over thinking about every purchase. We promoted shore excursions through announcements and staff recommendations because every tour sold created another commission. Even the internet became a serious business. The casino was even more powerful. It occupied limited space and could generate large revenue from a small group of passengers. Not everyone gambled, but those who did often spent far more than the average guest. That created a strange financial truth. The person who bought the cheapest cabin could sometimes become more valuable than the person in a luxury suite. A passenger in an inside cabin might buy drinks every night, book 2 excursions, visit the spa, play in the casino, purchase photographs, and upgrade dining. Meanwhile, a passenger in an expensive suite might spend almost nothing beyond the original ticket. Ticket price told me what they paid before the voyage. Onboard behavior told me what they were actually worth to the business. This was the first major twist in my plan. I thought the cruise line made money by selling transportation and accommodation. In reality, those services brought the customer into a controlled marketplace. The ticket was not the finish line. It was customer acquisition. And that meant discounting a cabin was not always a bad decision. If I sold an empty cabin cheaply at the last minute, I might earn little from the ticket. But if that passenger spent heavily on board, the cabin could still become valuable. An empty cabin bought nothing. It ordered no drinks. It booked no excursions. It purchased no photographs. It created no casino revenue. Once the ship departed, that opportunity disappeared forever. There was no warehouse where I could store tonight's empty cabin and sell it next month. That made occupancy urgent, but it also made the wrong kind of occupancy dangerous. Filling the ship with passengers who spent almost nothing could create the appearance of success while the business quietly underperformed. The ship could look crowded, the restaurants could be busy, and the pool deck could be full, yet the profit could still disappoint me. I needed bodies in the cabins, but I also needed spending behind those bodies. That was when I understood that my real product was not the voyage. It was the passenger's attention from boarding until departure. Then came the week when the weather changed everything. We were scheduled to leave Miami on a 7-night route through the Caribbean. Nearly every cabin was sold, the restaurants were stocked, and thousands of passengers had already booked flights, hotels, and excursions around the voyage. On paper, it looked like one of our best departures. Then a storm formed across our planned route. At first, the forecasts were uncertain. The storm might weaken, it might turn, it might move fast enough for us to avoid it. But a cruise ship cannot build a business plan around hope. My operations team studied the weather and calculated alternative routes. Changing the itinerary sounded simple. Financially, it was not. If we skipped a popular island, passengers could demand refunds for canceled excursions. If we added a different port, we needed docking space, local transportation, security coordination, and new permits. If we stayed at sea for an extra day, fuel consumption increased. If we returned early, passengers would feel cheated. If we delayed departure, hotels and flights became our problem. Every option had a cost attached to it. Eventually, we changed the route. The ship sailed safely, but the financial damage began almost immediately. We refunded canceled excursions. We paid additional port fees. We used more fuel than planned. We gave passengers onboard credits to reduce complaints. The voyage still happened. The ship still looked full. But the profit I expected from that week nearly disappeared. That was the second major twist. I had believed the biggest risk was an empty ship. Sometimes the ship could be full and still lose money. Weather was only one threat. Mechanical failures were worse because they could arrive without warning. A cruise ship contains thousands of systems that passengers never notice until one of them stops working. engines, generators, water treatment equipment, navigation systems, kitchens, elevators, air conditioning, fire controls, and communication networks all have to operate together. One serious failure can affect the entire voyage, and repairs at sea are rarely cheap. Specialized parts might need to be flown in. A delay of several hours can force the ship to miss a destination, creating another wave of refunds and complaints. Then there was illness. Thousands of people eating, sleeping, swimming, and gathering in enclosed spaces create a risk no hotel on land faces in quite the same way. A health problem on board could spread quickly, damage the company's reputation, and make future customers afraid to book. Cleaning costs would rise. Medical teams would work overtime. Ports could refuse entry. One voyage could become a news story, and one news story could reduce demand for months. That was the part of ownership I had underestimated most. The loss did not always end when the voyage ended. A storm could damage 1 week. A mechanical failure could damage several weeks. A public health incident could damage the entire brand. The ship was not only a physical asset, it was a promise. People trusted me to carry them safely, feed them properly, entertain them, and return them home on time. The moment that promise broke, the financial consequences moved faster than the ship ever could. Refunds were only the beginning. There were legal claims, emergency expenses, canceled future bookings, marketing costs, and discounts needed to rebuild confidence. Insurance protected us from certain disasters, but insurance did not make risk disappear. Policies had limits. Claims had conditions. Premiums increased after serious incidents, and some losses, especially damage to reputation, could not be reimbursed at all. By then, I understood why cruise operators keep large cash reserves. The business might look profitable for months, then one event could consume that profit in a single week. Owning the ship meant I carried the upside. It also meant I carried the storm. After the storm, I stopped asking whether a voyage was sold out. I started asking a harder question. Was it actually profitable? A ship could leave port with almost every cabin occupied and still produce a weak result if ticket prices were too low, the route was expensive, or passengers spent less than expected. So I began studying each voyage like its own business. First came occupancy. A cruise ship carries many costs that barely change whether the ship is half full or completely full. The engines still burn fuel. The crew still works. The kitchens still operate. The loan payment still arrives. That means an empty cabin is not just missing revenue, it is wasted capacity. If I had already paid to move the ship, run the air conditioning, and employ the crew, then filling one more cabin could be valuable, even at a discount, but only up to a point. Lowering prices too aggressively attracted passengers who expected the entire vacation to cost almost nothing. They filled the ship and avoided nearly every paid service. The occupancy report looked excellent. The spending report did not. I tracked 3 numbers: the cabin price, the percentage of cabins filled, and the amount each passenger spent after boarding. Ignore any one of them, and the picture became misleading. A high ticket price meant little if too many cabins stayed empty. Full occupancy meant little if discounts destroyed the ticket margin. Strong ticket sales meant little if the route consumed too much fuel or carried passengers who rarely spent on board. The real target was not simply a full ship. It was the right passengers, paying the right price, on the right route. Route selection became one of the most important financial decisions I made. Passengers wanted beautiful islands, famous ports, warm weather, and memorable photographs. I had to think differently. I had to calculate distance, fuel, port charges, local taxes, weather, competition, and the value of the excursions we could sell. A glamorous destination could be a poor business choice if docking there was expensive and passengers preferred exploring alone. A less famous destination could be profitable if the port was cheaper and local tour operators offered excursions with strong commissions. The spreadsheet showed the business. I also learned that timing mattered. The same route could perform brilliantly during a school holiday and struggle several weeks later. Families, retired travelers, couples, and younger passengers all behaved differently. They booked different cabins. They spent money in different places. Families bought photographs and internet packages. Couples spent more on dining and spa treatments. Older travelers preferred premium cabins and excursions. Younger groups often spent heavily at bars. I was not only choosing where the ship traveled, I was choosing which customer I wanted on board. Then we changed the way we sold the voyage. Instead of waiting until passengers boarded, we offered upgrades, drink packages, dining reservations, internet plans, and excursions before departure. That improved cash flow. Money arrived earlier, while many related costs would not occur until the voyage began. It also made passengers more likely to spend again after boarding. This was the system I had been missing. Profitability did not come from one giant sale. It came from thousands of small decisions repeated across thousands of passengers. One cabin upgrade, one restaurant reservation, one photograph package, one shore excursion, one drink package. None of them looked powerful alone. Together, they could decide whether a voyage created millions in profit or barely covered its costs. By then, I no longer saw the ship as a vessel. I saw it as a moving financial system. Every cabin was inventory. Every passenger was a stream of possible revenue. Every route was a cost structure. And every departure was a race to earn enough before the ship returned to port.